Sorry, everyone.
There you
I
go.
always
Here
like
you
to
go.
start our presentations by telling the audience who we are. The Central Florida Regional Planning Council was founded in 1962, and we are one of 10 similar council of governments in the state of Florida. Our role is to provide technical assistance to local governments and organizations within our 8-county region. We also have a 3-year partnership with a planning grant with the U.S. Economic Development Administration that allows to be the region's economic development district. As part of our grant agreement with EDA, the Council is charged with developing and implementing the region's comprehensive economic development strategy plan. The SETS, as we like to call it, is an economic development roadmap that seeks to make our community more resilient to changes spurred by economic shocks and natural disasters. Our approach to economic resilience is to focus on strengthening the region's population, economic, and place-based access. As part of this process, ECFRPC staff focus on identifying the industry clusters that drive the region's economic competitiveness. For those of you that are unfamiliar with the term, an industry cluster is a geographic concentration of interconnected businesses, suppliers, and associated industries. Council staff has identified 7 industry clusters of regional significance based on several characteristics, including their level of concentration, distribution across the region, and number of patents. These regional innovation clusters are tourism, modeling simulation and training, watercraft manufacturing, photonics, antennas and telecommunications, turbine technologies, and aviation and aerospace. The epicenter of the region's aviation aerospace cluster is Brevard County. This area is home to the Kennedy Space Center complex, which is NASA's premier launch center for human spaceflight. Another important economic asset is Patrick Air Force Base, which is responsible for most military satellite launches. The presence of these assets and the area's 50-plus-year legacy of spaceflight activity has led to the co-location of many high-technology companies and suppliers within the area. In order to preserve the competitiveness of the region's aviation aerospace cluster, community stakeholders need to focus their efforts on maintaining critical infrastructure assets. This includes State Road 405, which is also known as the NASA Causeway. This road is one of the only links between mainland aerospace suppliers and the Kennedy Space Center launch complex. The bridge integrity has been severely compromised through the years because of age, storm surge, and sea level rise. Because of this, the structure was recently deemed unsafe for carrying heavy spacecraft payloads and similar freight. This has created enormous pressure to identify funding sources to pay for the bridge replacement. The map on the right shows the different inundation levels within the study area, and the white box shows the location of the bridge. In 2018, the North Brevard Economic Development Zone partnered with the Council to apply for an EDA grant to help make the economic case for the funding the bridge replacement. As part of this project, Council staff developed 4 economic impact scenarios to estimate the importance of this bridge to Brevard County's economy. Now, I will let Matt explain more about the inputs and assumptions used to create the first scenario.
Thanks, Luis. To estimate the economic value of the bridge, we quantified 2 things. The first being the total earnings of all aerospace and aviation companies within Brevard County, and the second being the amount of money spent by Kennedy Space Center visitors. In order to understand the makeup of the targeted firms, we had to create a business profile based on the North American Industry Classification System, or NAICS. We used the Info Group database and identified over 400 businesses related to aerospace and aviation in Brevard County. But not all of these engage with the operations at Kennedy Space Center or Patrick Air Force Base. In order to maintain accuracy, we identified what each business was doing, what product they were manufacturing or selling, and who they were primarily doing business with. And if one of these businesses directly engaged with Kennedy Space Center or Patrick Air Force Base, they were tagged and put into a new group. This brought the total from 400 to a little over 100 businesses. Using this methodology, we also found that these businesses employed over 3,600 individuals and had approximately $686 million in annual sales. So this image is a map of Brevard County, and the colored points are the 106 selected firms. The majority of these businesses fell within 4 NAICS classifications: computer and electronic product manufacturing, professional scientific and technical services, fabricated metal product manufacturing, and specialty trade contractors. Also, we found 2 business clusters that are shown in the red boxes on the image. The northern cluster is Spaceport Commerce Park, located in Titusville, and the southern cluster is the Industrial Center in Melbourne. The 2 NSAT maps on the right give a clear picture of the clusters. So the second input we used to estimate the value of the bridge was Kennedy Space Center visitor expenditures. We chose Kennedy Space Center because of its premier regional status as a tourist destination, and the State Road 405 bridge is the only connection between the mainland and the center. According to its annual report, the visitor complex received over 1.6 million guests in 2017. We derived the economic impact of these visitors using hotel occupancy and visitor characteristics data retrieved from the Space Coast Office of Tourism. The tourism expenditure can depend on the length of stay, and overnight visitors seem to spend the most money. We used hotel lodging information and occupancy and average party size data from 4 nearby cities, which were Cape Canaveral, Cocoa, Merritt Island, and Titusville. And this yielded 441,124 overnight visitors in 2018, and then we subtracted this number from the Kennedy Space Center's total visitor data and was left with 1.2 million yearly visitors. The Space Coast Office of Tourism calculated that overnight visitors spend roughly $489 per person, but the same information cannot be accurately yielded for day trippers. And through this methodology, we calculated a total of $336.6 million spent by the visitors across accommodations, transportation, food, entertainment, and retail.
Thank you, Matt. Based on these 2 inputs, we found that the bridge is responsible for the creation of almost 15,000 jobs in Brevard County and close to 1,500 positions in other parts of the state. Brevard County also benefits from $1.6 billion in net sales and $699 million in personal income. Finally, this economic activity contributes more than $1 billion to Brevard's gross domestic product. Now is the time to talk about the second simulation. The purpose of this second scenario was to estimate the potential loss of future economic activity in the North Brevard Economic Development Zone because of the loss of the bridge. To develop the inputs for this simulation, we prepare a land use capacity analysis using parcel data from the Brevard County Property Appraiser's Office and other sources. The first step of this analysis was to estimate the amount of vacant industrial land found within the North Brevard Economic Development Zone. We used parcel size, wetland coverage, land use entitlements, and densities to estimate the final number of developable acres. Using this information, we determined that there are 880 acres available for aerospace companies. We then used a jobs per square foot multiplier to estimate the maximum number of jobs that could be housed within the area. This turned out to be below 78,000 positions. Now, according to REMI, the aerospace sector only represents about 37% of all the Brevard County's industrial jobs. When we apply this employment share, the final number of aerospace jobs was reduced to a little more than 29,000 positions. According to the REMI forecast, Brevard County's annual employment growth rate is 1%. Therefore, we added 290 positions each year for a 10-year period. We distributed these jobs among 6 manufacturing industry sectors based on the findings of the aviation profile. Based on these inputs, we found that this new investment could lead to the creation of 744 new jobs in Brevard County. This includes 290 direct jobs and 454 indirect and induced positions. It could also generate $164.3 million in sales and $77.2 million in personal income for Brevard County residents. Finally, the new jobs will add $103.7 million to the county's gross domestic product. Now, I will let Matt discuss the next simulation scenario.
So in scenario 3, we estimated the long-term economic impact of the complete closure of the State Road 405 bridge in Brevard County. There's two variables at play here. The first one is output figures for the aerospace businesses and tourist expenditure. Oh, no, sorry, there's two variables. The first one, output figures for the aerospace businesses, and the second one is tourist expenditure. These are the same variables as scenario 1, except we treated the economic losses differently. We scaled down the output figures for businesses based on their dependency to NASA and Patrick Air Force Base. This ranged from a 20% decrease for minor suppliers to a 100% decrease for some large defense contractors. Using that methodology, it was determined that 38 companies would cease operations in the study area because of the closure of the bridge. And the most impacted sector would be computer and electronic product manufacturing, with 21 companies experiencing 100% revenue loss. The least affected industry would be the wholesale trade and specialty trade contractors. With the bridge being completely closed and no replacement on the horizon, this scenario assumes that the Kennedy Space Center visitor complex would completely shut down. This would obviously lead to a major loss in tourism expenditures annually across Brevard County. Our model predicts more than $321.5 million in a loss of annual tourism expenditures in this scenario. This table depicts the result of scenario 3. On average, Brevard County could expect to lose over 13,000 jobs, $1.5 billion in business sales, and nearly $1 billion in personal income, and nearly $1 billion in GDP. Finally, this table breaks down the total output loss by industry sector. There are at least 4 industries that could be expected to lose over $100 million in sales because of the loss of the bridge. These industries are professional, scientific, and technical services, retail trade, construction, and computer and electronic product manufacturing. Luis will now provide a review of the final simulation scenario.
In February of last year, Space Floyd was awarded a $90 million infra grant to fund the replacement of the Nosa Causeway. Therefore, we decided to estimate the economic impact of using state or local funding sources to pay for the rest of the bridge. According to the Florida Department of Transportation, the total cost for replacing the bridge will be $127.8 million. The infra grant will cover about 70% of this cost, which leaves close to $38 million that still needs to be covered. Not surprisingly, using state funds to pay for the bridge will have a slightly higher economic impact than using local funding. This is because local government funds will need to be reallocated to pay for the construction of the bridge. In conclusion, the findings from our study showed that the State Road 405 bridge is a vital piece of infrastructure for the Brevard County's aerospace cluster. All the scenarios confirm that the economic value of the bridge surpasses the cost of replacing it. The question is, where do we go from here? At the ECFRPC, we're trying to use the REMI model to estimate the economic impact of these industry clusters and other resilience projects. We're currently using a similar methodology to estimate the economic value of the watercraft and turbine technologies industry clusters at the moment. Our staff will also be collaborating with Stetson University and other educational partners, including Dr. Rob Carey, who presented before us, to quantify the economic impact of several green infrastructure interventions for reducing flood risk. This is the end of our presentation. Thank you everyone for listening. I guess we'll get it back to you, Ian, for questions.
Thank you so much, Luis and Matt. That was a wonderful presentation. At this point, yes, we'll step right into our Q&A session. So if